Community connections, CMS. Local sounds, thoughts, passions, and success. Celebrate local, your neighbor's got a story to tell. Community connections, CMS.
Happy Monday, Waterloo Region. It is Monday, the 27th of January, 2025, the International Day for the Commemoration of the Victims of the Holocaust. We'll be speaking to Lauren Weinberg and Mr. M of Independent Jewish Voices Waterloo Region in just a few minutes. But this is Miss Tahi with Palestine. That's Miss Tahi, Palestine, on CKMS Community Connections. Today in the studio we have Lauren Weinberg and Mr. M from Independent Jewish Voices. Welcome to CKMS Community Connections.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. M was my father. You could just call me M.
All right, very good. Tell me about Independent Jewish Voices.
Well, we started pretty much on October 8th, 2023. IJV has actually been around nationally since 2008, but our chapter started right after Israel's attacks on Gaza began. Okay. And I think something like probably 5 or 6 of our current members contacted the national organization to ask if we could start a local chapter. And we've been growing, I guess, slowly but steadily ever since.
Mm-hmm. What makes it independent? Independent of what?
Yeah, maybe I can hop in. So I guess like the goal of IJV is that, or the idea is that like most Jewish institutions in North America are run and funded by people who are Zionists, and they are Zionist institutions. Like they support the state of Israel and its war crimes that it's currently committing.
Can you explain Zionism?
Yeah, sure. Zionism is the idea that Jews are have a homeland in Israel is what I guess a Zionist would say. Unfortunately, to do that, you have to kick out or expel or ethnically cleanse the indigenous population, which is the Palestinian people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Zionism's kind of a fraught term, but I think IJV would define it as has the right to exist as a Jewish supremacist state in which Palestinians don't have the same rights as Israeli citizens.
Some would call that apartheid.
Yes, yeah, and I think that is accurate.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The people who were in apartheid, like in apartheid South Africa, are some of those people who call it apartheid.
Yes. I understand there's a court case going on in the International Court of Justice initiated by South Africa to talk about that. But today is the International Day for the commemoration of the victims of the Holocaust. Let's return to that for the moment, and we'll talk more about Palestine in a bit.
Yes, so that day was designated by the United Nations, and it commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz, which was the largest Nazi death camp. And today's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Yeah, that's seems like a long time ago. Can't we just put the past behind us?
Well, I'd say definitely not. Those who don't are repeat it. So I think, we would all say it's imperative. I think what we need to do is connect it to genocides that have happened since and that are happening now, and try to learn from the Holocaust to prevent genocide.
Yeah, and are people taking that lesson?
Some people are. I think hopefully more and more people are. But I think what is frustrating, to IJV is when people don't try to put the Holocaust in historical context and recognize its connections to other instances of racism and imperialism. And I think that's not helpful for other victims of genocide, and I think it's not helpful for Holocaust survivors or contemporary Jews either.
I think it's an intersectionality that I wouldn't have thought of without you telling me about it.
Yeah. Just to harp on this point, there's this saying that you must have heard called never again, we never want this to happen again. And it feels like that's being interpreted as never again to the Jewish people. But I think anybody that's gone through the Holocaust or has been alive at that time, or anybody really who sees people as people, should say never again for anybody. We don't want a genocide to be committed to anybody. And more institutions that study genocide are saying that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And it's a really crazy thing to think about, a group of people having a genocide committed to them, and then how many years ago, I don't want to do the math right now, but is now doing it to a different people. I mean, it's really these cycles of trauma are, it's really a sad thing to think about. And so, yeah, we're I guess IJV's goal is, part of it is to say never again applies to everybody, not just the Jewish people.
Right. And that lesson has not hit home in several parts of the world.
Yeah, and I'm gonna blabber on for a bit, but I just also wanted to say that I think the reason that a lot of Jewish people are feeling Zionist is because there's always this threat of an imminent next Holocaust coming. And you can see examples of anti-Semitism happening, and it is, and I think the Israeli government kind of wants you and to think that there's more and more anti-Semitism, so you'll move to Israel and support Zionism, but there's actually a genocide being committed against a different group of people by this Jewish state. So I think we need to focus in on the genocide that's happening right now, and not I think that's a way to repair the world,
You said that there is backlash considered anti-Semitism. How does that work? Is looking out for your fellow human being considered anti-Semitic?
Well, I think that's where you see sort of Israeli propaganda at work. You asked, like, why is IJV called Independent Jewish Voices? So one institution that it's independent of is CIJA, or the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And they have really tried to portray IJV as a fringe group. You know, I think we would say it's not fringe or radical to object to the mass murder of civilians.
Yeah.
But I think that the Israeli government and has gone to a lot of effort and funded, I guess, efforts to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and conflate Jews in Israel. You know, I think there are plenty of members of IJV who actually are from Israel or have close ties to Israel, but some of us have no ties to Israel. And I think that's an important thing for non-Jewish Canadians to understand. So I think the backlash is, I think that, you know, it's upsetting to read about, say, someone firing shots at a Jewish school, but I think reports of this sort of wave of anti-Semitism are really overblown. And when organizations like B'nai B'rith, which is another kind of Jewish institution in Canada, put out a report about anti-Semitism, a lot of the incidents they're counting are things like pro-Palestine demonstrations. So we would not consider that anti-Semitic. That's very different from someone actually threatening someone Jewish or something like that. And I moved to Canada from the United States in 2014. I think since then, at least 10 Canadians have been murdered for being Muslim. So I think it's important for Jewish Canadians to have some perspective. And it's not like there is no threat of anti-Semitism. It's not like anti-Semitism doesn't happen. But we are not the most vulnerable people in Canada right now.
Right. And that thought of anti-Zionist being anti-Semitic as well is fairly pervasive, and it's pervasive in, I don't know, some fairly powerful places. For example, M, you're here being anonymous today. For what reason?
Yeah, there's just a lot of, well, my family is very Zionist, and they know how I feel, but they don't really know the activism that I'm doing. Like, they don't know I'm associated with IJV, and I know of a lot of people who have just been like basically disowned or like cut off from their family because they're supportive of Palestine, or they're like questioning Israel's like barbaric massacre of Palestinians. Because they fear for another Holocaust, so their family is saying like, oh, you want another Holocaust to happen to us. No, I don't. I just don't think we should be doing a genocide to another group of people. Yeah, like there's this saying that if you put two Jews in a room, you get three opinions. It feels like we're only allowed to have one opinion on this issue, and like, yeah, we're a historically descending people, so we're pretty diverse, and so yeah.
And it's at the point where this feeling that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism has caused people to lose their jobs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Jews and non-Jews alike. I think probably non-Jews more commonly than Jews, because I guess it's a harder sell to say that a Jew is anti-Semitic.
See that in politics too. I don't think there's any politician who would come out as being anti-Zionist.
I think the NDP and actually the Mike Morris, who's the Green Party MP for Kitchener Centre, he's been a real leader on this issue.
Yes.
And I think the NDP has certainly been better, not perfect, but much better than the Liberals or the Conservatives. And other activists in the movement who've been doing this work for longer have said that things actually have improved, that there was a time when even the NDP did not want to discuss Palestine. And I think they've definitely moved in the right direction on this issue. But it's very frustrating for us, I think, to see the way Justin Trudeau talks about it and the Liberal government, someone like Anthony Housefather, because it seems like I think Canadian Jews are just being used. I don't really believe the Liberals care about Jewish safety. I was saying to M before this interview that they care about Canadian weapons manufacturers.
Yes.
And so it's convenient to say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic because they don't want to, because to say otherwise might, in their mind, threaten the Canadian economy or sort of other interests.
Pretty sure that the Canadian economy will survive quite nicely without committing a genocide.
Yeah, we have plenty of mining operations and some pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have lots of things that we're doing to prop up our economy.
Yeah. I mean, we adapted when we stopped supporting apartheid South Africa, and if we had a real two-way arms embargo, I think we would be fine.
Yeah,
So.
I don't think that would cause a lot of problems. I'm thinking of the NDP. The NDP has, if they've turned and adopted an anti-genocide, an anti-Zionist stance, that's fairly recent, because it was only a few years ago that the provincial NDP kicked out Sarah Jama for supporting Palestine.
And I think they've still not been fantastic on this issue. You know, I think, as far as I know, they're still planning to run a candidate against her in Hamilton. So that has been quite disappointing.
Yeah.
But at least on the federal level, I think they are improving, but definitely still need to be pushed.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they would I don't want to say too much against the NDP, because like it feels like they're like all the progressive has. I mean, I'm not going to say so much about electoral politics, but yeah, it would be nice if they would cater to the progressives more than they do. And
I should say some liberals have shown leadership on this issue. There is a petition, I guess if you go to armsembargonow.ca, a letter that many MPs have signed saying that they want a real two-way arms embargo. And Tim Lewis, the Liberal MP for Kitchener-Conestoga, eventually signed it, after a lot of pressure from Palestinian activists, IJV, a lot of local faith leaders. So, and there are a number of Liberal signatories. So it's unfortunate it's not reaching the top, but yeah, it's definitely like a multi-party issue.
Okay. Good for Mr. Lewis. Yeah. I think we're just about due for another piece of music. I think we're going to play a song called Checkpoint. This is by Jacini X from, I'm not sure what album that's from. Oh, the Free Palestine album.
Times, tales from the dark side, evidence of the settlements on my hard drive. Man, I swear my heart died at the end of that car ride. When I saw that checkpoint, welcome to apartheid. Soldiers wear military green at the checkpoint. Automatic guns, that's machine at the checkpoint. Tables not M16s at the checkpoint. Fingers on the trigger, you'll get leaned at the checkpoint. Little children grown adults and teens at the checkpoint. All your papers better be clean at the checkpoint. Gotta put your finger on the screen at the checkpoint and pray that red light turns green at the checkpoint. And Martin Luther King had a dream of the checkpoint. He wake with loud screams from the scenes at the checkpoint. Is Malcolm X by any means at the checkpoint? Imagine if your daily routine was the checkpoint.
And Martin Luther King had a dream of the checkpoint. He wake with loud screams from the scenes at the checkpoint. Is Malcolm X by any means at the checkpoint? Imagine if your daily routine was the checkpoint.
Separation walls that surround in the checkpoint. On top is barbed wire like a crown on the checkpoint. Better have your permits if you found at the checkpoint. Gumming on the tower, aiming down at the checkpoint. Idea is to keep you in fear at the checkpoint. Enter through the cage in the rear of the checkpoint. Feels like prison on a tier at the checkpoint. I'd rather be anywhere but here at this checkpoint. Nelson Mandela wasn't blind to the checkpoint. He stood for free Palestine at a checkpoint. Support BDS, don't give a dime to the checkpoint. This is international crime at the checkpoint. Arabs get treated like dogs at the checkpoint. Cause discrimination is the law at the checkpoint. Criminalized without a cause at the checkpoint. I'm just telling you what I saw at the checkpoint. Soldiers got bad attitudes at the checkpoint. Condescending and real rude at the checkpoint. Don't look them in their eyes when they move at the checkpoint. They might strip a man or woman nude at the checkpoint. Soldiers might blow you out the shoes at the checkpoint. Gas you up and in like the fuse at the checkpoint. Every day you stand to be accused at the checkpoint. Each time your life you could lose at the checkpoint. And Martin Luther King had a dream of the checkpoint. He wake with loud screams from the scenes at the checkpoint. Is Malcolm X by any means at the checkpoint? Imagine if your daily routine routine was the checkpoint.
And Martin Luther King had a dream with a checkpoint. He went without screams from the scenes at the checkpoint. Is Malcolm X by any means at the checkpoint? Imagine if your daily routine was the checkpoint.
At the airport in Tel Aviv is a checkpoint. They pulled over our taxi at the checkpoint. Passport, visa, ID at the checkpoint. Soldiers going on through my things at the checkpoint. I was high risk security at the checkpoint. Cause of the oppression I see at the checkpoint. Occupation in the 3rd degree at the checkpoint. All I wanna do is leave the checkpoint.
Checkpoint by Jaziri X from the Free Palestine album, EP perhaps. We were talking about having court cases, or at least CRA actions to, I don't know, reduce the amount of anti-Zionism in the world. I'm not entirely sure. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So there was a huge step forward recently where the CRA no longer recognizes the JNF, or the Jewish National Fund, as a charity for which you can, I guess, get tax deductions. So the JNF, I think, is a really good example of kind of Israeli Hasbara or propaganda. When I was growing up, I thought the JNF just planted trees in Israel. And I thought, oh, Israel is a desert, and it's so great that the JNF is like planting all these trees and making the desert bloom. Well, the JNF does a lot more than plant trees. Unfortunately, it's one of the main organizations that's engaged in ethnic cleansing in Palestine, and it would drive Palestinians off their land, and then get rid of the olive trees that are native to the region and plant pine trees that don't even belong there, and kind of help establish I guess a Zionist sort of foothold in this area. So it's really good that is no longer being rewarded by the CRA. And I think there are a couple of other sort of smaller organizations that are Zionist that have also been I guess dropped by the CRA. And there are still efforts to get them to I guess delist the Chesed Foundation, which Heather Reisman, the CEO of Indigo, funded. They help Canadian soldiers go fight for the IDF. So that's a clear violation of CRA regulations. And also another organization called Honest Reporting Canada, which puts a lot of pressure on the media not to report sort of the truth about Palestine. That's another, I guess, current target of kind of activism with respect to the CRA.
It's all done through tax means, by removing
Yes.
charitable status for these organizations. Yeah. When organizations, I've heard that they're recruiting people to work with the IDF in Israel. I understand that's illegal in Canada as well. You can't recruit people for a foreign army on Canadian soil. But I understand that happens too. Is IGF involved in identifying and eliminating any of that?
Our chapter isn't directly involved in that, but I think IJV on the national level is.
Okay.
And I think that some of it is because Waterloo region is so small. I think things like that tend to happen at maybe Jewish schools, which you would find in Toronto or Montreal, places with just a larger Jewish population. So I guess our chapter hasn't been focused on that, but I know that is something the organization does on a national level, which we really support.
Right.
Yeah. Go for it.
Go ahead.
National level, they have like lawyers and stuff. We have a couple of local activists that we do like local activism in the city. So maybe are we going to talk about that later? What
We
we
can
actually
talk about
do?
that now.
Okay.
What
yeah.
sort of activism does IJV Waterloo region engage in then? What do you do in the local neighborhood here?
Yeah. Like what we do has two different branches. The first branch, some Jewish life, like Jewish events, Jewish things that you could go to that don't make you feel insane, that aren't Zionists, that aren't trying to brainwash you into joining the Israeli Defense Force or the Israeli Offense Force or whatever you want to call it. So that's one of it. Hosting Shabbat dinners, hosting events that you can go to if you want to be engaged in the Jewish community. And then the other one is doing activism. So being an independent Jewish voice, saying not all Jews support this. What you're doing is not supportive of the Jewish people supporting this right-wing country. So some things that we do are yeah, we like support like protests. We've had like fundraisers. What else? What other things can you think of that we've done?
And I guess I should say, with our pro-Palestine activism, we try to take our lead from Palestinian activists. So there's a group with a local presence called Palestinian Youth Movement. We sort of look to them. They organize a lot of the local rallies. And another local, local to Waterloo region organization is Spora Scattered, which supports like local Palestinian youth. And so we kind of look at what their demands are and kind of, try to support them with our pro-Palestine activism. So I guess some of our members were supporting the encampment that was at the University of Waterloo last year. And I guess, as Em said, we've sort of helped fundraise for Palestinian causes, been a presence at rallies, the press, and, to emphasize that, like, not all Jews feel the same about this issue. And we've also had some events. Last year, we had a really successful Passover Seder. The Seder is the traditional meal that you have during the Jewish holiday of Passover, which is usually in April. And so we had one at the Kitchener Market, which was open to Jews, some of our comrades from IJV's Guelph chapter, our Palestinian allies. And that was a beautiful event. And I think it meant so much to everyone who was there. I think we had more than 50 attendees. And everyone said it was incredible to be at a Seder that was not focused on Israel and that was, just focused on our life here and thinking about the story of Passover, which is a story of liberation in relation to what was going on in Palestine and Palestinian freedom. And so we're going to have another Seder in 2025. And so I think what we're trying to do is grow our capacity this year and I guess just continue to offer kind of an alternative vision of Jewish life that is focused on our lives here in Canada. I mean, I guess another thing that seems very strange to me as a Jew living in Canada is why are we so focused on this foreign country where a lot of us have no connections? There's a concept called Doikheit that a group called the Jewish Labor Bund developed in the early 20th century, which means here-ness in Yiddish. It's sort of saying, like, your community is where you find yourself. And that, I think, just makes a lot more sense to all of us than kind of orienting ourselves to, a country where we don't live and whose values we don't agree with.
Right. Although there are plenty of people who do agree with those values, and that's what we consider part of the problem.
Yeah. And I think it's important, too, for people to understand the role that Christian Zionism may be playing in this as well. Because although, unfortunately, yes, there are plenty of Jewish Zionists here and in the United States, I think that when the federal government is, showing such strong support for Zionism, and especially I think when the conservatives are showing such strong support for Zionism, they are not just catering to Jewish Canadians who really make up a very small part of the population. They are, I think, catering to Christian Zionists who support Israel because it's part of their vision of the rapture. And they think that if Israel is controlled by Jews and if they can ideally get us all to move there, that's going to hasten Jesus's return. So a statistic I often cite is that in the United States, I think there are something like 6 million Jews, and there are 10 million members of Christians United for Israel, which is a Christian Zionist organization. And so I assume that the demographics are similar here in Canada. And I don't know how many Jewish conservative MPs there are, but I don't think there are many. I think that this is just part of the sort of Christian fundamentalist worldview.
I see. I've heard too that there might actually be more Jewish people living in North America than in all of Israel.
I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think worldwide most Jews do live outside Israel and not in Israel.
Yeah. So that leads me to question, the practicality of the Zionism plan of having all Jews move to Israel. Not enough room, I wouldn't think.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, no. like put all of us in this country that's constantly at war, like that. Some people want the rapture to happen in. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Personally, I don't know. I'm happy here, being on this stolen indigenous land rather than stolen indigenous land on Palestine.
Canada isn't in the clear on self-determination for indigenous people either.
No, and that's actually something that's like a classic Zionist argument. It's like, well, if they're settlers, then you're one too, and the response to that is yes, and it's bad. So we should be like working to support land back initiatives and stuff like that. And I think that that's something our chapter can do more of, and I hope that we do that like more going forward.
Yeah.
Certainly, one bad thing doesn't justify another bad thing.
Yeah, and you should just oppose both of them.
Exactly. So you've got the Seder planned for, I guess, April-ish. Any other activities? Any other plans?
Well, I think in the fall, that's when the Jewish high holidays are, and I think we would like to do something then. That's a time when I think it's usually very meaningful, for Jewish people to get together and sort of have services for the Jewish New Year and Yom Kippur, which is the most important Jewish holiday. So I think we'd like to do something in Waterloo region that would be a public event, open to all. And in the meantime, I think just try to have more educational opportunities, for both other Jews in Waterloo region and the general public. There are a lot of excellent documentaries that have come out, that I think offer kind of a more accurate view of what life in Palestine is like, and what the Israeli government has been doing. So I think we'd like to hopefully have some more film screenings that people could go to and learn from. Actually, an organization reached out to us recently that works with refugees from sort of that part of the world and said they would like to have a dialogue. And when I talked to them, we were all very interested in maybe having a book club. So I think that would be something really meaningful. And then I guess there's a holiday called Tu B'Shvat coming up in February, which is the New Year of the Trees. So there's actually a Canadian documentary about the JNF, the organization we were just talking about. This movie is called My Tree, and it's about a Canadian Jew who had a tree planted for him at his bar mitzvah, which is a very common thing that people do. And, for the JNF. And then when he was an adult, he decided he wanted to go find his tree in Israel. And so I think he does. And his film about this ends up getting into what does the JNF actually do and what has the impact really been of kind of this phenomenon on the Palestinians who were living there. So I think we're going to sort of watch that among ourselves. And I think we just want to really continue to sort of build our community and hopefully just keep being welcoming to people who are feeling alienated, either, I guess, just from the institutions that are there, who kind of won't acknowledge other voices. And I guess continue to show solidarity with our Palestinian neighbors and help them as best we can. And I think everyone in our chapter feels that we have a responsibility to speak up and I guess not let ourselves be used, especially by our government as an excuse to kind of perpetuate this.
What venues do you have available to you to do these things? Is there pushback from the venue owners that would not want the philosophies and views of IJV to be held on their premises?
It's difficult. I mean, when we have our Shabbat dinners, we're gathering in our homes. It's tough because I think there's so much backlash every time. For example, in Hamilton, there was an independent theater there that wanted to show Israelism, which is one of the documentaries I was thinking about. So they showed that, and then I think the Hamilton sort of Jewish Film Festival said, okay, well, we're not going to have our festival at your theater anymore. And, it was kind of a whole thing. So we had an event at the University of Waterloo, and the member who organized it said that she got some flack for that afterward. And I think it's been very difficult for pro-Palestine groups to sort of find space to have things on campus. But otherwise, I think some venues are fine with it because they would say, okay, like you're just renting our space and this doesn't kind of commit us to whatever sort of belief. And, so we, I guess that's been possible. I guess for say something like film screenings, we haven't looked into it. And I am hoping that, theaters in town would be I guess, amenable to us. Again, like I don't think our views are really very radical.
Yeah, I don't think it would be bad for business. And there are examples, like the Kitchener Farmers Market hosted our Seder. Like, I'm pretty sure there was a film screening at Apollo Cinema. I don't want to make it like it. It's good for business to be on the right side of history, I would say. People want to go to cool businesses. You should have IJV events, you should have PYM events, you should have Spora Scatters events if you're a business listening. It'll make you seem cool, and people will want to show up. Yeah.
I mean, Kitchener City Hall just, I guess last weekend, hosted a beautiful event that this Palestinian organization, Spora Scattered, organized. And they had an exhibition of Palestinian art and workshops about Palestinian culture. And that didn't seem to be controversial at all. And that was a wonderful, really affirming event. So
it may not have been controversial because it may not have been well advertised. I hadn't heard about that.
Maybe.
Possibly.
Yeah. Maybe.
I mean, it was dead center in the city, but yeah, it was a cold weekend, so maybe not everybody saw it, but yeah.
There's that too. What about the synagogues in Waterloo region? Are they amenable to the ideas of now?
Unfortunately, no. I suppose I'm not familiar with all of them, but and that's not true of all synagogues everywhere. I think you've been to some great services for synagogues in Toronto. Yeah. There's actually a very famous, really inspirational anti-Zionist synagogue in Chicago called Tzedek Chicago, which has online services and, I think is a resource really for people far beyond Chicago. And I'm starting to learn about more and more kind of progressive synagogues, I think all across North America, that are either explicitly anti-Zionist or very open to, having a discussion about this. But locally, no, and I'm not entirely sure why. I guess, again, we do have a very small Jewish community, and that seems to go along with maybe being more Zionist.
The two shuls that are in this city, one is an Orthodox shul and one of them is a Reform shul, and both of those movements are nowadays, like they're just two types of Judaism, I guess, types of like mainstream Judaism, and both of them are typically very Zionist. Although Reformed Judaism, when it started, it was anti-Zionist, but we don't have to get into that because I don't know so much about that. I just kind of read like half of an article, but all that is to say, there's just no synagogue that has started in this city that is not Zionist. And I mean, that's something that feels like an end goal for me, is to like have some like a space to go pray.
Friend of mine, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've read a little bit about Jewish history in the Waterloo region, and the synagogues that exist now started off as a group of people praying in someone's living room. So when we have our kind of Shabbat dinners at each other's homes, I think that's fine. I feel like this is the beginning of something, and
it certainly feels like that.
Yeah, and I know nationally there is a movement of Reform Jews in Canada who are trying very hard to kind of have a more open dialogue and help our Palestinian neighbors, and I guess just kind of reverse this trend of Reform Judaism becoming more Zionist.
Yeah.
But there are, I think, members of every movement of Judaism who are anti-Zionist, and including the Orthodox movement. Yeah. So I think I guess it's kind of, I'm not sure what the factors are that influence the way local institutions are, but again, it's not the same kind of everywhere.
You mentioned that the two shuls in Waterloo region, are they actively teaching these things?
I went into this interview being like, I'm not going to be like slandering anybody. I will say the one thing that I don't know if it's slanderous, but it was like a public thing that like people know is the Orthodox one like had a rally, like a march for Israel, where they got like an IDF member to like speak to everybody, like somebody who was just in the army, like that was committing a genocide in Gaza.
IDF is the Israeli Defense Force.
Yeah, the Israeli Defense Force. Some people refer to it as the IOF, the Israeli Offense Force, because they use this, we're defending ourselves so to justify committing like really heinous crimes.
Right.
So some people try to flip that. But that's what they call themselves, so that's what I'm going to use. But yeah, so they had a member of this army speak at this rally. Maybe that's where I'll stop. Is just none of these synagogues have hosted an anti-Zionist rally.
Right. The reason I ask is that a friend of mine, Dave Kattenberg, who hosts Green Planet Monitor, which is on the radio at 3 o'clock on Mondays, he says that what is happening in Israel, the expulsion of the Palestinians, the genocide in Gaza, is completely contrary to Jewishness. It's completely contrary to the teachings of what should be the teachings of the shuls, teachings of the rabbis in the synagogues. So the whole idea of Judaism does not align with what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complicated thing because, like, we're basing it off of this text that was written like 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or more.
More.
And so, and it's interpretations of interpretations of interpretations. And so, like, part of my journey right now is to like try to find interpretations that feel like better to me. But you can really get some genocidal things out of the literal text from the Torah, so it's kind of the Bible. Or you can get some really like beautiful things, like whatever, like love your neighbor. Or, So yeah, like I do like. It's a less convenient answer to say that, well, it's complicated, but
It is complicated.
I like Judaism in itself isn't necessarily a good thing. Like, we have to be good people.
Yeah.
We can't just be like, oh, it's a beautiful religion, so like we're tikkun olam, like we're trying to repair the world. Like, we actually have to do tikkun olam, which means repairing of the world, which means trying to make the world a better place. So sorry to give you a more complicated answer.
I think I agree with M. Like, you can find verses from the Bible that I think Netanyahu has been quoting that support what they're doing, but I keep coming back to a saying from a text called Pirkei Avot. I think it's Sayings of the Fathers, which is when I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, when you kill one person, it's like you're destroying a whole world. And I guess that's something that's really grounding for me, and that's kind of the root of my opposition to what the Israeli government is doing, that every civilian life that's lost, that shouldn't be happening. And, I think just the kind of carelessness with which the Israeli government has been carrying out these attacks, and not even carelessness. I mean, I think it's deliberate that they're just trying to kill as many people as possible. That's completely contrary to my vision of Judaism. And, I think you also can find a lot of support for that we are supposed to be making the world a better place and preserving human life. And that's what motivates us in IJV.
Yeah. And like, on a similar note, like, there's really like lines that are pretty easy to interpret as homophobic or like transphobic things.
Lines in the Torah.
In the Torah, but you see there's a really big movement, which is like really cool, of like in the pro-Palestine Jewish movement, there's a lot of like queer people who are like reapproaching their Judaism and like trying to like find like some beauty in these texts and all these rituals. I think it's a really like beautiful thing, and I think that they're like a really, really significant part of the current movement, and I really like appreciate them, and Yeah, and I think especially for any Jewish listeners, really, for anyone listening, there's a great magazine based in New York called Jewish Currents. Their website is jewishcurrents.org. They're an anti-Zionist publication. They have a lot of Jewish contributors. I think learned a lot from them over the past several years about what's going on in Palestine. And they've started having an interpretation of kind of the weekly Torah portion every week, which is really interesting, I guess, for me to revisit the Torah, which I hadn't thought about much since childhood. And I think they've been sort of
kind of demonstrating that you can have all these different interpretations of that text and finding a kind of progressive and maybe anti-Zionist way to look at it. So I think that has been, I guess, really a valuable resource, I think, for all of us too.
Yeah, if I could make a slight divergence, or I know we're kind of off topic, but there was a really funny episode of the Jewish Currents podcast where there's like this rift in the Jewish radical movement where I think the previous generation is less into the they're more secularist, they're less into reading the Bible and interpreting it, and now we see, like, I think my generation is more into that. So there's a really fun debate between like these younger people and these older folks in the movement, and the older folks are like, this is sacrilegious to be doing this, and so and the younger people are like, well, we need something like spiritual to ground us or something like that. So yeah, it was really interesting and a really fun interview. Yeah.
What was that podcast?
It's the Jewish Currents podcast. It's called On the Nose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you sent us a list of other literature, recommended reading, do you have that handy, or?
We did. I think I can remember, or I think Em might have it handy.
Yeah,
I've got it in front of me here, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think something we really want to emphasize is that, of course, it's crucial to remember the Holocaust and, you know, and honor the memory of the Holocaust victims. But I think we're really dismayed to see some people trying to exploit the Holocaust to justify what the Israeli government is doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that ends up undermining the goal of Holocaust education. But there are a lot of both, you know, a lot of nonfiction books and I guess fictional explorations of the Holocaust from an anti-Zionist perspective, which I think are really important. So one of them is The Zone of Interest, a film that came out, I think, in 2023, whose director was Jewish and very famously made a speech when he accepted, you know, an Oscar, saying that he did not want his Jewishness or the Holocaust kind of hijacked for the benefit of an occupation. There's also...
Can I talk
sure,
about
sorry,
one?
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'll let you hop in. You can look at the list after. There's a couple texts on like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Specifically, one is this play written by this Toronto Jew that I really like look up to, Dara Title. She rocks. Shout out to Dara Title. Yeah, but it this idea, really, like, the Holocaust movie that everybody looks to is Schindler's List, which is a movie that I have a lot of conflicting opinions about. It's this movie about this like Christian capitalist guy who has a factory full of Jews during the Holocaust who are basically his slaves until he sees a massacre happen, and then he feels bad and saves them. And he has this secretary, like this hot Jewish secretary, who it's like really, like, it makes me feel very weird. And then at the end, they're like, okay, the Holocaust just happened. You guys have all just gone through a genocide. They like, and then like the Israeli national anthem plays as they march to Israel. And like, that's like the Holocaust movie that people like refer to. So seeing narratives of like Jewish resistance to fascism in like the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, something that there's a lot of parallels between the resistance in Gaza to, I think is a really like interesting narrative that like doesn't really see so much data, which I think. I think it's really helpful for people to read up on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Yeah.
So Em shared this this book, The Ghetto Fights, by Marek Edelman, who was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And this was actually not published in Hebrew until 2001 because Marek Edelman was an anti-Zionist.
Yeah. And like most of the leaders of this were like, and like a lot of the fighters were like Bundists, like this left-wing. Often anti-Zionist group in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no. There's another book by Suzanne Berliner Weiss, who is a member of IJV, I think in Toronto, called Holocaust to Resistance: My Journey. And so she was a child during the Holocaust and, you know, was hidden by non-Jewish neighbors, survived, moved to Canada, and now is a pro-Palestine activist. And I think the theme of her book is all about solidarity And again, I think it's important in considering the Holocaust to think about other victims of the Holocaust, like the Roma and Sinti, disabled people, queer people, communists. And then again, how does this relate to other genocides that have happened before and since? Jewish Heretics, which is a podcast about anti-Zionist Jews, which is produced by the United Jewish People's Order in Toronto, is another really good resource. But I think, again, specifically about the Holocaust, it's a classic, but Mouse by Art Spiegelman, I think, is a really excellent book for anyone who just wants to know what was it like in Auschwitz. And Art Spiegelman is someone I respect very much, and, he's not a Zionist. And so again, I think at least you can trust that you are learning about this, and it doesn't have a particular agenda beyond just trying to say this is what it was like for victims of the Holocaust.
Right. What I'll do is I'll publish your recommended reading list on the show notes, which you can find at radiowaterloo.ca/ccc. It'll probably be a few weeks before I get it online. I'm terribly behind in getting my show notes up on the website. You have an online presence?
We do. I'd say we're particularly active on Instagram. So it's IJV_Waterloo Region. We're also on Facebook. I think that's just IJV Waterloo Region. You can email us. That's IJV_Waterloo at IJVCanada.org. And did you want to talk about some of the... But yeah, so you can online if you're interested in joining us for Shabbat or any other program, email us or message us through Instagram or Facebook. You can contact us that way. And did you want to mention?
Yeah, you might have to hop in just to give me. But yeah, we just wanted to give a shout out to two organizations that if people are listening and they're wanting to help out, I think people should donate to the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec. That's doing a lot of support for children in Gaza and in the West Bank as well. I think there's a child sponsorship program. So that's a really good way to spend your money to help victims of a genocide. And for more local stuff, I think it's Palestinian and immigrants from the Arab diaspora in general, right? It's sporus.ca. You can donate to them to support people who are local. Yeah.
And yes, and this reminded me actually, listeners presumably are aware that there is a ceasefire in effect right now, but that doesn't mean that the situation is over or, there's still so much work to be done, and it's not even clear that the ceasefire is going to hold. Unfortunately, the IDF has now that the ceasefire is in place, has started attacking many more people in the West Bank, where it has already murdered several hundred people, if not more, and started targeting hospitals in the West Bank now that it is not allowed to target hospitals in Gaza. So there's still so much injustice that we have to address. So I think all IJV and some of the other activists that we're working with, we're kind of adjusting our strategy, I guess, accordingly. But although I'm really glad there is a ceasefire, we should definitely emphasize this is not over. I think this is going to be a lifelong struggle.
Yeah, before October 7th, Gaza had been under siege. I don't want to do the math, but it's been 20 years? No, not 20 years. Gaza had been under siege for over a decade, which means that Israel controls the amount of food and water and resources that gets in. They're putting them on a diet, as one of the Israeli ministers put it, which means doing a math calculation of how many calories each person needs and then sending in and under that. So if we're just returning to the status quo, we haven't really freed Palestine just yet.
Right.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. The operation in the West Bank, I think, is called Operation Iron Wall, which I think comes from one of the original people from the Likud party. I think I'm getting too into the weeds, but Zeb Jabotinsky, you could look up Zeb Jabotinsky. He's not a good guy, and it's based on some of his writings. So yeah, maybe that was a little bit too much of a reach, but yeah, there's a lot that needs to be done, is my point.
I mean, I've found when I've tried to argue with Zionists, some of them will say, like, well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. And, like, no, that really wasn't true. I mean, IJV's sort of national position on the October 7th attacks is that it condemns all violence against civilians. And it said that included Hamas's attacks, and it included the siege of Gaza, which had been, and the blockade, which had been going on for so many years and making life intolerable for people in Gaza. And I guess I keep coming back to that as well, that, you know, again, and then you have this apartheid regime in the West Bank, and Palestinians in Israel are, you know, don't have equal rights with Israeli citizens. And all of that is unacceptable and, you know, and just a form of oppression that we need to fight against. So, yeah.
Considering the current political situation in the United States, just south of us, things seem to be escalating rapidly, worsening rapidly. We've got a couple of elections coming up here in Canada. It's at the end of January now, and I expect that by the end of the week we'll have a provincial election on our hands, which will probably take place in February. The Liberal leadership election is taking place in March, probably to be followed by a federal election in April. Do you see the politics of Canada changing towards that of the U.S. or away from that of the U.S.?
I have no predictions to give because I don't really know so much. I will say that if somebody wants to get elected, I think you need to support Palestine in like a really significant way, and not just saying you're working tirelessly like they did in America. Like, you actually need to like do something and have people believe in you that you're going to do it. So yeah, I would just say if you're running, try to run on and promise and actually do something that supports Palestine or gets Canadian funding away from that.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people stayed home during the American election because they were just so disappointed by the Biden and Harris camp stance on this issue. And so I hope that, you know, all of the parties learn from that. I am certainly no expert on Canadian politics. Unfortunately, it does seem like things are trending to the right, as in the States. But I would say I think what's really going to count is changing public opinion. And I think the government's going to have to follow suit if the general public is educated about this issue and changes their view. And something else that listeners can do and should sort of be on their guard about is the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. IHRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. And the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is something IJV opposes because most of the examples it uses actually deal with criticism of Israel and not real anti-Semitism.
I should not have opened up that can of worms so close to the end of the show. I want to thank you, Lauren Weinberg, and M of the Independent Jewish Voices of Waterloo region for coming on CKMS Community Connections today. Thanks so much for coming. You'll have to come back because we're not finished talking yet, I don't think.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
You're very welcome. You've been listening to CKMS Community Connections on CKMS FM Radio Waterloo. CKMS Community Connections is a production of Radio Waterloo, sponsored by Radio Waterloo. Executive producer is Jennifer Strong. Associate producer is Jeff Stager. My name is Bob Jonkman. The theme music that we've been listening to is produced by Stephen Todd and performed by Stephen Todd. CKMS Community Connections airs every Friday at every alternate Friday at 3 p.m. and on Mondays at 11. See you again next week.